You're listening to Midlife State of Mind podcast, hosted by Erin, a midlife gal who dishes on all the challenges and opportunities that come with this middle section of your life. Each episode, you'll find yourself going between laughter and tears as she covers all the topics you need to know about midlife.
Welcome back to Midlife State of Mind. I'm your host, Erin. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode today. If you are a new listener to the podcast, welcome to the conversation on all things midlife. I would love to have you hit the follow button so that you can stay in the loop on whenever a new episode drops each week. And if any episode has particularly resonated with you, and if you enjoy the content that I create, I would be eternally grateful if you would leave me a rating and a written review on whatever podcast platform you listen to me on. And lastly, if you're interested in some additional ways you can support the podcast, take a look at the show notes and you will see a list of some of my favorite things. All of the products listed are ones that I use and I love, and I always recommend them to friends, which I definitely feel like you guys are my friends. And if you do choose to purchase any of the products with my link, then the podcast will earn a small commission, which just helps offset the expenses of producing it. All right, well, let's get into today's episode. You guys, this episode has been recorded and re-recorded several times. I just have not been satisfied with my ability to express myself. I want to talk about this idea of being a late bloomer. And according to Wikipedia, late bloomers are people whose talents or capabilities are not visible to others until later than usual. And that usually is something that we think of a late bloomer as a child who hasn't developed yet. They're behind their peers, either it's a boy that's still really short or it's a girl who hasn't gotten her period and she hasn't developed. I was definitely a late bloomer, I will tell you. I was always the smallest one. I was behind in developing. And then it wasn't until like the summer between 10th and 11th grade that I actually got to my adult height. And then I was taller than everybody almost. Being a late bloomer, when we think about that term, we think about a teenager. But it also can refer to someone who hasn't maybe experienced the success at the age that society typically says is average. And there was a research study done by mint.com that said up to 40% of people feel behind the eight ball when they look at what society says is normal and what society's expectations of them are. And some of the people that they polled felt behind in relationships. Maybe they're in their 30s and they haven't found their partner, or they might not have had kids, or they may not have had the success in their career that they thought they would have at this time. If you think about when you were in middle school and people asked you what you wanted to be, and you're like, I want to have a Ferrari and I want to be a ballerina and I want to do this and that, and then you're in your 30s and you're still renting and I drive a Ford Taurus. The way that society kind of has these expectations, early achievers are always very praised and lauded as, oh my gosh, a child prodigy. And so then when you don't meet those expectations that society has, you feel like there's something wrong with you. Most of us have probably either read or heard that quote about all the famous late bloomers. It says something about how Tina Fey didn't achieve success till her 40s in Hollywood, and Grandma Moses didn't start painting until she was in her late 70s. Colonel Sanders didn't found KFC until his late 60s. Then Julia Childs, Martha Stewart, Morgan Freeman, all of them, they were later than the average person in achieving success. And so my issue with the term late bloomer is that it does imply that there is something wrong with you when you achieve something later in life. And I definitely applaud early achievers, but for me, I feel that as a quote unquote late bloomer, life experience gives us so much valuable insight that is often lacking for those early achievers. Sometimes it's luck. Sometimes it is just they're a savant and they are a tech wizard like Steve Jobs with Apple. The early achievers, I believe, are the outliers. I believe that most of us are what you would call a late bloomer. And I actually think that there are some very strong benefits to being a late bloomer. when you are older, I feel that you have more of an idea of who you are and you're very comfortable with yourself. You've done all of the personal growth and development over the years. And so then you actually feel really comfortable with yourself and you don't feel the pressure to conform to society's expectations of you. Often as a late bloomer, quote unquote, I use that term, you've developed perseverance. You're less likely to throw in the towel and quit when things get tough or don't go your way. And then I also think that being a late bloomer allows you to focus more on the journey and less on the actual outcome of whatever it is you're trying to do. And so, for example, for me personally, the podcast has really been so much more about my own growth than it has been about getting massive downloads or having enormous success. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do a really big happy dance every time I see the downloads. And so I'm not saying that I don't want to have success in whatever I do, but I think that oftentimes in this stage of life and midlife, basically who I'm speaking to, all the people in midlife, is that we feel less pressure to achieve and more at ease with just enjoying the actual process. And so all of the things that I have learned through trying to, create this podcast, and often I failed, have all just been gifts that I would not have been given because my younger self would not have had the confidence to do something like this. So ultimately, even though I do have a beef with the term quote unquote late bloomer, I 100% love to see people achieving at any age. And I really just want to implore to you today, to those of you that are listening, is do not let society's timetable stop you from doing what you want to do at whatever age. If you are in your 60s and you want to take up ballroom dancing, take up ballroom dancing. If you are in your 90s and you want to learn how to twirl a baton, then do it. There is nothing that says just because baton twirlers are usually 6-year-old girls doesn't mean you can't do it. Every experience that you've had, every skill that you've gained, an achievement that you've had, all happen at exactly the right time for you. I guarantee you. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on being a late bloomer, what you feel about that term, and if you are a late bloomer. You can weigh in on the conversation on my social medias, Facebook and Instagram, Midlife State of Mind Podcast, or you can send me an email, midlifestateofmindpodcast@gmail.com, and send me your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you and what you feel about this topic. I'll be back next week with another episode. Have a great week. Bye.
This has been an E Squared production.